In Scotland, an airport runway vanishes underwater twice daily. There's an island that still celebrates Christmas on January 6th, since no one told them to stop. And a mainland village where roads don't connect to any others in Britain. Not a single one. They just loop back to where you began. Today, we're visiting 7 communities that chose to live off the map. Places where kids take boats to school. Where your electricity comes from a wind turbine you built. And the nearest store is 60 miles away. 7 inhabited villages, all still refusing to leave. And by the end, you'll get exactly why. Let's start with the village holding the Guinness World Record for remoteness on mainland Britain. Invery, Knoydart, population around 120. The closest city is Glasgow. The trip would take 14 hours if you could drive there, which you can't. Invery's roads aren't connected to any others in the UK. The 7 miles of tarmac in the village lead nowhere. They just loop back to where you started. To get here, take a 7-mile ferry from Malig across Loch Nevis. Or walk 17 miles over mountains through the rough bounds. And they're not exaggerating. This is some of Britain's toughest terrain. But here's where Knoydart's story shifts from geography to something else. During the Highland clearances, families were forced out for sheep. In 1853, 330 people were shipped to Canada. 11 families refused to go. Their eviction became notorious. By the mid-20th century, the population dropped to about 60. Then, in 1948, 7 men, many veterans, claimed 65 acres each. Their landlord was Lord Brocket, a Nazi sympathizer. He sued them and won. But those 7 men lit a fuse that burned for 50 years. In 1999, Knoydart residents bought back their land. 17,500 acres, in a community buyout. Since then, the population has doubled. They run their own hydro grid, brewery, and forestry. And in 2022, they bought the pub. The Old Forge is mainland Britain's most remote pub. 75% of the village owns a share. They crowdfunded it after the previous owner let it decline. They renovated and reopened it in 2023. It's a place where you arrive a stranger and leave knowing everyone's name, because there are only 120, and they all drink there. Knoydart sits between Loch Nevis and Loch Hown, heaven and hell in Gaelic. Depending on the weather, you might get both in an afternoon. This community was cleared, abandoned, fought over by rich people and managers for 200 years. And now it's thriving. That's not isolation. That's intention. Invery chose the sea over. Our next community went further. They chose to live without mains electricity. Scorig, a peninsula on Little Loch Broom in the northwest. Population around 70 to 80. No road, no mains electricity, no mains. To reach Scorig, a cliffside path from the nearest road. This isn't paved. It's exposed highland coast. Rocks underfoot, loch on one side, a sheer drop. On the other, an unpredictable weather. Here's where it gets interesting. Scorig died out in 1963. The last resident, Billy McRae, took and left. The peninsula was empty, finished. For decades, Scorig was forgotten. Then a wave of idealists arrived with a different vision of home. Counterculture settlers, called hippies by the press. They came in the late 60s and 70s, took over old crofts and built an off-grid community from scratch. Today, every household generates its own electricity, mostly wind turbines. Built to a local design. Scorig residents pioneered small-scale wind power. Decades before the rest of Britain. They add solar and hydro, but wind is their main source. The community has a small primary school. Kids over 14 go to Ullapool High School, meaning boarding during the week. You can't commute across a loch. Arrives by sea. When tides and weather allow, a BBC profile captured their values. One said he was tired of his office job. Another said she didn't want a job or its costs. A third simply said everyone here escapes the system that dictates who you should be. Scorig had 380 Gaelic speakers in 1871. 0 in 1963. It has 80 now. And the children born there are the first generation with parents also born there. That's not a commune. That's a community with roots. If building your own power grid sounds extreme, what about driving a Applecross, Wester Ross, a peninsula cut off by the Pass of the Cattle? The UK's steepest road ascent. Single-track hairpin turns, 20% grades, and a summit at 2,053 feet. In winter, snow gates close, and Applecross reverts to its historical state. An island attached to the mainland. For most of its history, Applecross was only reachable by sea. A monastery was founded here in 672 by Mael Ruba. The road built in 1822 is now one of Britain's most feared drives. The first contractor quit in 3 months, driven mad by the conditions. Even after construction, it was unsurfaced gravel until the 1950s. In winter, it was impassable for weeks. To catch a train at Kyle of Lochalsh, 10 miles away, you had to row out and flag down a passing steamer. The second road opened in 1975 along the coast, but it was too late for the northern settlements. In 1884, 400 people lived there. By the time the coast road arrived, most had left. The road came a century too late. Today, Applecross is on the north coast 500. Tourists flock over the pass in summer, but the village still lacks three-phase electricity. The brewery had to be in Kishon because of it. The nearest petrol station, opened in 2010, is the UK's first unmanned pump. It cost £40,000 and uses a card reader since there's no staff. The alternative is a 36-mile round trip to Loch Carron. A sign at the bottom warns it's unsuitable for learner drivers. A sign warns it's too tough for new drivers. No arguments. When snow closes roads, locals just wait. They've waited 1,400 years. What's another week? And remember, we're not even at the island where planes raced the tide just to land. Applecross finally got its famous road. Our next island used the beach as a runway. Barra, Outer Hebrides. About 1,200 people live here. It's 8 miles long and 5 miles wide. Its airport is the only one in the world with scheduled commercial flights landing on a beach. Barra Airport is on Trémoire, a tidal flat on the island's north end. Wooden poles mark 3 sand runways in a triangle. The tide comes in twice daily, erasing them. The flight schedule follows the moon, not the year. Logan Air flies twice daily from Glasgow in a 19-seat Twin Otter. The hour-long trip lands you on wet sand at low tide, with the Atlantic near where the runway was hours ago. The airport opened in 1936. In 1957, manager Kitty McPherson ran it. alone, clearing debris before each flight. It now handles over 14,000 passengers yearly. When the airport's closed, the runway becomes a public beach. Dog walkers, surfers, families. Planes land where kids built sandcastles. An hour before. Castle Bay, the main town, is overlooked by Kissimmul Castle on a bay rock. Clan MacNeil held it for centuries. Chief Rory the Turbulent used it to raid English ships in the 1500s. The castle's lease to historic Scotland was £1 and a bottle of whiskey annually. I hope that deal still stands. I hope so. Gaelic is still common on Barra. It's a tight community. The Oban ferry takes 5 hours. If the weather shifts, but if landing on sand seems odd, wait till you hear about the island that celebrates Christmas on the wrong date. Foula. Shetland, 20 miles west of Shetland mainland, in the open Atlantic. Around 30 people live here. 5 square miles, 5 peaks, and one of Britain's highest. Dakami drops 1,200 feet into the ocean. Remote. The name comes from Old Norse fugli, meaning bird island, and it lives up to it. Foula has the world's largest colony of great skuas, huge seabirds Shetlanders call bonksies, which can knock you over during nesting season. Puffins, guillemots, kittiwakes, and fulmars. The cliffs teem with them. Birds. But here's the detail that stops people. When Britain changed its calendar in the 1750s, Foula didn't. They still celebrate Christmas on January 6th and New Year on January 13th. Nearly 2 weeks late. They've done it for 300 years and won't change. Tradition. Getting to Foula is a 2-hour ferry from Uya Sound on Shetland mainland, 3 times a week. Or a 15-minute flight from Tingwall in an 8-seat plane, weather permitting. No car ferry, no pub, no shop. Phone signal is limited. In the 1960s, bad weather isolated the island for 77 days. No ferry, no flights, no deliveries. Just 30 people, 1,000 sheep, and the Atlantic. Isolated. In 1720, a smallpox epidemic killed 90% of the population. Because they were so isolated, islanders had no immunity. Out of 200 people, only about 20 survived. The population peaked at 267 in the 19th century. Now it's about 30. There's a primary school with few students. When the head teacher retired in 2022, they advertised for a replacement. To teach 4 kids of different ages on one of Britain's most remote islands. Requirements included emotional stability and survival skills. Every resident wears multiple hats. Ferry crew, fire crew, nurse, postman, ranger, fisherman, crofter. The island generates its own electricity from renewables managed by a trust. Supplies arrive by boat, ordered a week ahead. Online shopping works, one resident said. Just choose Royal Mail to avoid courier surcharges. When they deliver to a tiny rock in the middle of the sea. Renewables, yet people stay. They choose this because on Foula, when the wind dies and clouds clear, you're on the edge of the world. Nothing between you and Norway. But open ocean. That silence has a value you can't quantify. Silence. And that's not even the furthest you can go. The next island is beyond roads. Beyond supermarkets, beyond ferry schedules, almost beyond the horizon. It almost didn't survive. Horizon. Fair Isle, between Orkney and Shetland, the UK's most remote inhabited island. 3 miles long, 1.5 miles wide, population around 50. You reach Fair Isle via a 2.5-hour ferry from Shetland on the Good Shepherd IV, running twice weekly. Or fly from Tingwall in an 8-seater. Britain Norman Islander, weather permitting. Both services are often cancelled. If fog rolls in or the wind picks up, you're stuck. And on Fair Isle, the wind always picks up. Norse settlers named it Fridaire, Island of Peace, which is ironic, as in 1588, the Spanish Armada's flagship, El Gran Griffin, stranding 300 starving sailors on an island with fewer than 200 people. The islanders fed them for 6 weeks. The Spaniards called them savage people who mostly ate fish. Relations were strained. The population dropped to about 50. With no electricity and limited running water. Evacuation was seriously considered. But then ornithologist George Waterston bought the island post-war and founded the Bird Observatory in 1948. It saved Fair Isle. The National Trust for Scotland took over in 1954 and has been rebuilding ever since. Over 350 bird species have been recorded on Fair Isle, more than anywhere else in Britain. It's on migratory routes between Europe and North America. The Bird Observatory burned down. It's a major bird migration spot between Europe and North America. This makes it a top Western world location to see rare birds blown off course. The Bird Observatory burned down in 2019. The rebuild cost £7.4 million. It reopened in 2025. Fair Isle is also where Fair Isle knitting comes from. The technique, those geometric patterns, crosses and hexagons, is world famous. The knitwear industry still sustains islanders today. A French textile artist moved here in 2017 because she fell in love with it. The island held the last manned lighthouse in Scotland. South Lighthouse was automated in 1998. 211 years of light-keeping tradition ended. And in 2021, Fair Isle became the first place in the UK where every single adult was vaccinated against COVID. When you've only got 50 people, logistics are simple. What strikes me about Fair Isle isn't the isolation, it's the defiance. This island was meant to empty. Every economic and demographic indicator said it should. And yet 50 people are still there, knitting, birdwatching, crofting and waiting for the Good Shepherd to bring the post. Now, we've covered islands, peninsulas and a pass so steep it drove a Victorian contractor insane. But our last village isn't cut off by the sea or the mountains. It's cut off by something more fundamental. Distance. Kinloch Burvey. Northwest Sutherland, the most northerly port on Scotland's west coast. Population roughly 400. It was even shortlisted by the Oxford English Dictionary as the definition of the word remote. That's not a joke. The Oxford English Dictionary literally considered using Kinloch Burvey as its example. 60 miles from the nearest supermarket, the bank arrives on a lorry. So does the cinema. Both are mobile. The road in is the A838, much of it single track with passing places. Winding through some of the most sparsely populated landscape in Western Europe. But here's the twist. Kinloch Burvey is also one of the most important fishing ports in Scotland. Despite being at the absolute edge of the country, boats from the east coast make the journey to land their catches here. Refrigerated lorries then haul the fish south through the night to markets across Europe. This village at the end of the world is plugged directly into the continental supply chain.